happened to the Africans once they arrived in British North America?
The first Africans to arrive were brought to Jamestown in Virginia in 1619. Historians now believe that the first group of 20 or more Africans were from an area near Luangwa, a city in the Congo region of Western Africa. Although the practice of enslaving Africans was being done in other parts of the New World, there were no laws in Virginia at the time that would make Africans slaves. So, they worked as indentured servants, serving for 3 to 7 years. Their labor was used to raise tobacco, which had quickly become the cash crop for the colony.
It didn't take long for the English to realize the benefit of using African labor, especially since it was becoming increasingly difficult to attract white indentured servants into the colony. From 1619 until the 1650s, most Africans found themselves held in bondage for their entire lifetime, even though slavery was not yet legal. In addition, the English treated them badly and considered them savages, just as they had the Native Americans. Although laws in British North America became increasingly restrictive, enslaved Africans and their descendants forged a new African American culture that was a mixture of different West African cultures and European culture. They also influenced every aspect of life in colonial America. They influenced family relationships, religious expression, music and dance, and challenged how Europeans defined freedom.
By the 1750s, more than 54,000 Africans had been brought into the Chesapeake region. This number may seem small, but remember, many who had arrived before this time had formed families, making the black population of Virginia over 150,000, or 40% of the overall population by the 1770s. Some cities had populations that were predominantly black. However, most slaves were being used as field laborers on large tobacco plantations. These plantations would have anywhere from 20 to 100 or more slaves. Slaves also worked as domestics, doing chores like horse and stable grooming, gardening, cooking, laundering, or housework.
They lived in group log cabins on parcels of land called quarters. Eventually, slave housing would be called slave quarters. These quarters became places of refuge for many. It allowed slaves to get away from the watchful eyes of the overseer or master. It was a place where they could gather with family and friends. It was a place where they were more than slaves. They were husbands and wives, mothers and fathers, and children who could play.
As the numbers of Africans and their descendants continued to increase, many political and social leaders wanted to halt the numbers of Africans coming into the colonies. Some wanted to end the transatlantic slave trade because of fears that as the slave population grew, there would be a greater threat of slave rebellion.
And a very small minority wanted to end slavery altogether. It may sound strange, but in the late 18th century, a person could be an abolitionist and not want to end slavery. Instead, they wanted to abolish the slave trade.
Virginia became the first colony to ban the importation of slaves by land or by sea in October 1778. The idea was to stop slave trading vessels from entering Virginia's ports.
There were exceptions, of course. For example, a person moving into the colony could bring their slaves with them, but they had to prove ownership and had to register them within 10 days of being in Virginia. Travelers to the colony could also bring their slaves, but they also had to leave with them. If a master didn't follow the law, the slave could be set free.
Some hoped for outright emancipation for blacks and expressed those beliefs at the Constitutional Convention. The debates that followed were heated.
One person who was involved in trying to find solutions to the slavery issue was Thomas Jefferson. His first attempt came in 1769, when his proposal for an emancipation plan was soundly rejected in Virginia's House of Burgesses.
He developed several different plans to abolish the slave trade throughout his political career. He'll share with us some of the ideas he and his colleagues considered and tell us why he thinks they didn't work. A American slavery lasted for almost 100 years after the American Revolution. It did not end until 1865.
The transatlantic slave trade didn't end until the 1880s. By the time it was over, it had changed the history of the world.
The enslavement of African people meant the largest forced migration in the history of mankind.
People were enslaved simply because of the color of their skin.
Let's hope such a tragedy never happens again.
Thank you for joining us today.